Welcome to Get Serious. Just a few notes on, again, continued lessons on being detail oriented, especially when it comes down to the bottom line and reviewing various line items on HUDs you receive for closing. So we are finally wrapping up this close on a property that I think to the day we've worked on for a year. I think this might take the record for the longest property that we've ever dealt with. It's not like we held it for a year. We actually only held it for less than 3 months. It just took forever to initially close. Really messy title situation, and then we should have even closed on the sell side even quicker, but there was more continued fights about undivided interest in the property, even though we had an owner's title policy that completely cleared all of that up with the same underwriter that the sell side title company was using. The same underwriter as our buy side handled. So eventually we got them to remove that, but that just caused extra delay here. And in this case, when we were reviewing the HUD to close, the prorated taxes seemed very high on it. This was an ag property. It didn't have an ag exemption, but it had prorated taxes of like almost $6,000 for vacant lot further north of Houston. And we also, and the thing that kind of complicated this lot is that it straddled two different counties, which added additional significant complexity besides just the messy title situation. One of the counties was much easier to work with than the other one. One was like far more rural, and so you needed all this various back and forth. So they each had their own separate taxes, and they kind of were divided in regard to how the total acreage splits were accounted for, and it's like almost a 40-acre property. And so when I was looking at this, $6,000 of taxes here, it was almost twice as much as we were expecting. And even though we have like an anticipated very solid return on this, and we're again usually under the gun, as with most title companies, you only have your docs to review pretty much one day in advance, if at best, before a notary has to be scheduled and get docs into closing. Then it all of a sudden, it turns into kind of a fire drill to sort this out, unless, I really delay closing again, but then you risk the buyer, and for, what reason, but, it's like a few grand to the bottom line. Like that's at least worth taking a look at to ensure, hey, is something really not proper here? Because, there's a number of times, how often is the initial draft of the HUD 100% correct? I would say it's like roughly a coin flip in our experience. Like usually there's something that needs to be adjusted. In this case, like pretty substantial, like, a few $1,000s. Yeah, and especially in a difficult market, it's worth fighting for, almost every penny when it comes to, shifting your total net profits that you can receive on, hard fought deals. This one we've been working on for a year. And so we also looked at our buy side HUD, and we had noted there was two separate line items for the prorated taxes, and they were substantially lower. Again, this was like only, less than 3 months ago. And that was credited to us, fortunately, but it didn't make sense that the prorated taxes that was going to be a debit when we sold the property was like over 2x as much. So we had to question them, like, what? And it was only one line item, so it wasn't even divided up into two separate counties. So we pushed back on that, and customer service here as a title company was just terrible. Again, so some title companies have been excellent to work with. We operate nationally, so sometimes it's a grab bag. I don't like outing by name. Just, sometimes they're the only game in town, and you kind of have to work with these folks. So the title companies are almost like a home services type industry. It's like, they can afford to have bad customer service. And sometimes if they're the only folks around, it just doesn't matter because you're kind of at the behest of working with them. And so I inquired, like, okay, this doesn't make sense. Here's our closing HUD from the buy side of this parcel, like none of these numbers add up. Can you like just help break this down here? And then they responded, at least pretty quickly, but they were like, okay, such and such for this county is this amount. And by the way, there's a separate ISD that has its own tax that is also added on to this specific county. And that's all they said. And so like I followed up, can they at least share some documentation or like showing this calculation, not just, hey, here's a sentence of here's the numbers, and it's several $1,000s. That seems way off. And can we just get some type of real confirmation on this? And again, title companies, like they, by law, have to order tax certificates, at least in Texas, to cover their own ass, and that was also on the HUD. Technically, we were paying for the tax certification to come in, so they couldn't even provide that to us. So like it didn't add up, and like then I was going to each of the county websites. I brought in the land investor who worked with us. Like, hey, can we help sort this out? Like this just doesn't add up here. Like let's come back to them with more data. Let's even call the counties and get more of a bottom line. And we went and we called the counties and we found out, yeah, okay, this ISD that was incorporated, that's like just completely incorrect. It's attributed to the wrong county in the first place. The county that you attributed to doesn't have anything to do with that. We have confirmation. Here's the number. Here's who we talked to. You can confirm. And by the way, this is also after, when I asked a shorter email prior of like, hey, can you send over some documentation? Like their only response to the title company is like, we called over there. Like it just grinds my gears so bad. Like this customer service is so tough. Like how do you get away with, again, we already know the reason why they can get away with it. You're only game in town, but I don't understand why people don't take more pride in serving their customers. Like that's the lowest hanging fruit to stand out from any other potential competitor or way to build your business. Like I just can't stand it. I'm like ultimate pet peeve. And our broker was getting involved. They asked for the tax certificates that, again, were on the HUD and ordered. And the title company was like, yeah, they're requested but are not in yet. And by the way, we're anticipated to close like less than 24 hours by the time they're sending this. And I know sometimes, I'm sure you've seen, if you've been in the land business for a while or real estate in general, you might get a refund from the title company later, like the taxes were off, and they'll send a check later in the mail. Usually it's like a pretty nominal amount, sometimes a little bit more substantial, but rarely more than like $100 or something. But in this case, again, we thought they were off on their tax calculation by like potentially a few $1,000s and couldn't display the proof for it. Plus, they were charging us on the HUD for a tax cert that they did not even have in hand yet. It just did not really add to our trust of their ability to kind of handle this. And so then, I sent a longer follow up again. Hey, here's who we talked to. This is the exact numbers they quoted. Like all of this is only adding up to roughly $2,500 for the entire year of 2025 across the two counties. And, not even accounting for like the roughly 2.5 months that we have to prorate the taxes. So, can you just like, please explain this? Or you said you'd called them before. Can you call their office again and just like confirm this? This is what we confirmed. And then also like, hey, my notary is arriving here in a couple hours. Like, and again, this is just all of a sudden this turns into a fire drill where, I had a bunch of other tasks on my plate. And it's like, fighting over a few grand. It's like right in that middle area of what is worth the time. All of a sudden, like, an hour and a half of my day in total to deal with this is just eaten up by dealing with this tax situation. Like, can't focus on anything else. So like, it's a big hurdle that some of these just come up. Trying to deal with it just because like we couldn't get a straight answer from the title company. And then the follow-up email after my longer follow-up was just like a revised HUD that did take off the proration for the roughly $1,600 of the ISD tax that they certainly misattributed to the wrong county. We had that confirmation, but zero other explanation. And it still came back as higher by like still another like 1,500-ish bucks, that we were not sure why it was that high. And we had called the counties. There was zero confirmation on why it should be that high. So, like, I again went back to them and just like, you know, can you not provide a better explanation than this? Can you not call the tax departments? Like, we just called them. We got different numbers. You guys are still not updating this. Uh, you know, the tax cert that we're paying for in the HUD, you don't even have yet. Like, we're not going to rush closing just, until we have 100% confirmation on the math. And then finally, they explained, again, this was roughly an hour and a half since like all of this back and forth started. They explained, okay, you're conveying like the roughly 40 acres, and the taxes that we had pulled was for a smaller subsection, like roughly 25-30% of the property that is within that ISD and one of the counties. And then there was an additional account that was not easily found. Like, I still wasn't able to find it on the other county's website. But they did mention, hey, like there was separate acreage, like still almost, 25-30 acres that was a separate account that has its own tax wholly within that county. But like it also didn't have the original seller name. And so it wasn't easy to be found when we were doing our initial research here. Again, even the tax assessor department wasn't helping us. But then they were like, okay, that amount for that separate acreage is this amount. And so that's what gets us to like that full number. And at that point, it's like, okay, still we'll have to get the tax cert, but it's at least enough of an explanation that, and I could go back and confirm, okay, yeah, the acreages didn't fully incorporate like the up to 40 acres. Mea culpa on that miss. Nevertheless, like it wasn't that easy to be found in the first place here. And it's like, hey, if you guys knew this right from the start, like if you had given me that explanation with my first email, which is all we were trying to sort out, like that would have saved us all 90 minutes of back and forth and calling, etc. But nevertheless, we still got like 1,300-ish off the initial taxes we were supposed to pay on the first HUD, because again they just did sloppy work and double counted the ISD tax. And again, it still didn't add up from the first tax credit we received for the prorations when we first bought the property. And that's just another too little too late, because that first title company just missed the ISD tax that was supposed to be prorated. So we should have received when we closed like another $1,000 credit. But again, that's sometimes just hard to confirm. And usually you're paying more attention to debits as line items versus credits. Just kind of nature of the game here. I'm not like always double check, especially in more complex tax situations like this. And we didn't, that was just missed. And so like, yeah, we're not going to go back to the original seller and try to fight for an extra $1,000. That would not be, likely to go anywhere. And it's like too little of money to kind of fight. But yeah, that, introduces another delta where we could have, had a little bit more powder to work with from a net return perspective. And now we're eating like a little bit extra tax. So like ultimately it's going to be like, I don't know, a $2,000-ish hit compared to what our initial expectation was for the exit here. Which is better than like the 3+ K that we had started with, that it was off by. Take the victories where you can. But, again, ultimately, customer service issue, like you guys didn't do your job from the start, and you could have just provided that explanation right away, and that would have prevented all of this back and forth. And like, again, just like zero apology or, sorry we didn't have this info before, or hey, sorry we didn't have the HUD initially right. Here's the new, like, it's just, you can tell probably a lot of these folks working at title, like they do not like their jobs, are low paid, not really trained in customer service. Again, they don't need to. It's kind of a power play setup. Probably dealing with a lot of ornery customers like myself that are just fighting about line items a number of times, sometimes justified, like we were in this case. So like I can understand from that standpoint, but it's still like, this does not engender any further trust. Like if I could avoid working with this title company again, in the future, like 100%, we would say, hey, no way if we can avoid it. But again, like, do you really try to, create a bigger stink publicly outside of this? And so again, I'm skeptical because of the way our business is oriented, where we have to operate across a larger footprint that, if we start, sending in some negative Google reviews and stuff like that, I don't really want to risk where we might have to work with this company again in the future to get even potentially worse service, or not able to like fully complete a deal just because of this here. So it's like, then you have to kind of bridge that gap. Like, say, how public do you really want to make this, or just like, don't take your business to them in the future. So maybe you guys have some opinions on that. And if I was just like a customer, a B2C client, just like buying a house, whatever, or buying land not outside my business, then yeah, I would leave a Google review. Who cares? Because you're probably like pretty much a one-off for the most part. But I think as a business owner, you have to be a lot more cautious about leaving negative reviews. At least that's just my hesitation I would mention there. So nevertheless, this like podcast should be pretty clear on how I felt about this situation. I'm sure you guys have dealt with things in similar fashion as well here, but hopefully this helps you again realize, double check the math every time, question any fee that seems too high. If it seems too low, keep your mouth shut, right? Like that's the vice versa play. But when it seems too high, like just ask about it, figure it out. Like plenty of times it's a mistake, like we found out in this situation. When, again, dollars are hard to come by. So with that in mind, seriousland.capital for any of your funding needs. Land Daily Diligence Facebook group just did one yesterday. Several pretty unique deals on that one, including a really pretty interesting West Virginia potential subdivide. And then landpricer.ai, working on that more today here. Most reliable land pricing tool on the market. With that in mind, subscribe and share. Talk to you all next time. Bye.